We've heard the term sustainability thrown around for several decades now, but Justin, in reality, in biology and on our farms and ranches in nature, there is no such thing as sustainable.
Oh man, that's going to require an explanation. Alan Williams, author, speaker, and consultant, is my guest as he explains more about that comment and how it directly relates to adaptive grazing. What is adaptive grazing? What is it not? And the 3 rules of adapting grazing. But if you think this is going to be a complicated concept, well, hold your horses.
It doesn't take a college degree to know how to do this, to be quite honest with you. It just takes simply keen observation and intuition and a handful of key measurements that any of us can do on our own.
And at the end of the day, it's about creating a healthier soil that can generate more net production, more profit, and be more resilient in drought. Here's another angle. Land's not getting any cheaper, and rather than buy more land, well, maybe your greatest return on investment is right under your feet. That's on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us. Pull up a chair, do whatever you need to do. You might want to even star our program here today. I've got a fresh pot of Cowpuncher coffee already brewed up and ready to go in a steaming cup in front of me with just a little bit of cream. And I'm excited to share our conversation here with you today with Alan Williams. He's a 6th-generation family farmer. He's also one of the founding partners of Understanding Ag, as well as the Soil Health Academy, author, speaker, consultant. And if you've also been able to watch the mini-series or documentaries entitled Carbon Cowboys, well, you'd seen him on there as he's been a contributor of that series as well. So joining us on our program here today is Alan Williams. Alan, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation here today, Alan, on a couple different levels. Number one, because I think what we're going to be talking about with the term adaptive grazing and how that all comes into play and how understanding that and how that is applicable to each of our ranching operations. But also, I have found that in your ways of going through this, kind of simplifies some of this. I think in the last many years, our industry has become more receptive. I'm not saying that we've arrived, but every year more and more ranchers are becoming more receptive about understanding or trying to look at their soil biology and ways that they can build that back. And so today, as we focus on that with our program, I want us to start with the term that you use a lot called adaptive grazing. And let's start at a high elevation, and throughout our program, we'll drill down on that and explain to us what that means.
Absolutely. And I want to preface it by saying that, what we're going to talk about today, we have implemented on farms and ranches of all different types of sizes in all 50 U.S. states and 45 plus other countries around the world. So the principles that I'm going to share today work absolutely everywhere, no matter your environment, your climate, your soil type, and no matter the size of your operation. We work on everything from small farms and ranches to our largest client has over 2 million acres and everything in between. So we've proven that this works in all of those. But here's what we have discovered, Justin. So in the decades that my partners and I have been doing this on our own farms and ranches and on literally thousands of clients' farms and ranches around the world, is we've boiled it down to what we call the 6-3-4, the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes. And for those that want to learn a lot more about that, they can go to our website at understandingag.com, and we've got a lot of information there. But the bottom line is this, is that, we have discovered that if we're on our farms and our ranches, if we're working in our grazing practices and in our cropping practices within the context of those rules and those principles, then we can be highly successful, and it'll create greater net profitability, greater production, and greater resilience.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that starts to get a little bit overwhelming for folks is We all grew up in agriculture. I can go out there and I know what to do if we got to pull a calf or if I got to go put up fence. But when we start talking about everything that's from the grass, tips of the grass down, boy, it's a little confusing. Unless you went to college for it, I think for some of us, we're afraid to just really, for lack of better words, dip our toe in the soil.
Yeah, and here's the good news: is it doesn't take a college degree to know how to do this. To be quite honest with you, it just takes simply keen observation and intuition and a handful of key measurements that any of us can do on our own. We don't need a laboratory to do them for us. We don't need somebody else to interpret them for us. For instance, we have one of the key measures that we do is we call it the shovel test. And it is exactly as it sounds. How many farmers and ranchers have actually taken a spade, or what I call a sharpshooter, and actually spent time digging in their soil to see what their soil really is truly like? Very few, unfortunately. We'll dig to bury a water line or to repair a water line or something else, but we rarely dig simply to evaluate our soil. And we can, in the span of 10 minutes, we can teach any farmer or rancher what are the key things to look for in a shovel test. The next important tool is a very simple water infiltration ring. How effectively can your soils actually infiltrate water? And look, that's important everywhere, but it's very important in the West, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the West, we're talking about semi-fragile and fragile and brittle environments. And we've got a lot of water issues already. So being able to determine how well your soils can infiltrate, whether it's snowmelt, whether it's irrigation, applied irrigation water, or whether it's precipitation, we need them to be functional in that regard. The third tool is a simple thermometer, an infrared thermometer. Knowing the temperatures of your soil is very critical. I'll share with you this: the highest temperature I've recorded in a soil, and this was out in southern Idaho on a pivot growing crops. And they were actively running the pivot, and it was 162 degrees soil temperature. And we routinely find soils in pastures, rangeland, and in cropland that's hitting 130 to 150 degrees. Now, Justin, I don't know about you, but I'm sort of a medium rare type of guy with my meat. I don't cook my meat to 160 degrees, okay? I think it's overdone. So what in the heck do we think is happening to our soils, at those temperatures? And then the final tool is a simple refractometer to measure point-in-time nutrient density in our forages that our livestock are eating. So those four tools, the shovel, water infiltration ring, thermometer, and a refractometer, anybody can be taught to use in a matter of minutes. And those are tools that every farmer, every rancher can use on a very routine basis to be able to monitor and track the progress that they're making. Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about the phrase, as you're coining it here, adaptive grazing. Mm-hmm. I've heard of other types of grazing. Of course, we've heard of, continuous grazing. We've heard of intensive grazing. We've heard of mob grazing, all these different things that go ahead of the word grazing. I wasn't as familiar until I did a little research on my own to realize, okay, I kind of understand it. But let's get into that and why you're calling it adaptive grazing, because there's some pretty specific reasons why it's called adaptive grazing.
Absolutely. So adaptive grazing is very simply a form of grazing that allows us to be very flexible or adaptable to ever-changing conditions. In agriculture, we've heard the term sustainability thrown around for several decades now. But Justin, in reality, in biology and on our farms and ranches in nature, there is no such thing as sustainable. There's no such thing as stasis. We can't maintain. Mm-hmm. Okay. And in a moment, I'll get into what we call the rule of compounding. But basically, everything that happens out here creates compounding, cascading effects. And those effects are never neutral. They're either positive or negative. And so sustainability does not exist in reality in agriculture. It's all about either progressing or digressing. And so the only way to really effectively continue to make ongoing positive progress is through adaptive grazing. In other words, observing and shifting and changing what we're doing routinely based on what we are observing in the actual conditions. So adaptive grazing, I'll tell you what it's not. It is not a prescription, a formula, or a recipe. And the very moment you try to turn it into a prescription, a recipe, is the moment you are now non-adaptive. You can't be those two and be doing things prescriptively. So it's actually far better, to be honest with you, than the prescriptive methods of grazing that we're all familiar with and we all practiced. I was a prescriptive grazer, just like almost everybody else. And you always hit a wall. It's unavoidable. And with adaptive grazing, we don't hit a wall. It allows us to make ongoing incremental progress year over year, decade over decade.
Mm-hmm. In that, I know one of the things that requires to understand with adaptive grazing is understanding the difference between stock density and stocking rates. That's a different thing. I know as I heard you talking about stocking density versus stocking rates, I always figured out here where we were more arid, I always looked at stocking rate more than I looked at stocking density. But really in some of this, we really do need to understand stocking density is applicable to, again, no matter what environment you're in.
Absolutely it is. So I think we all understand stocking rate. It's acres required per head, right? And we all do still have to work with our appropriate stocking rate on our ranches. That being said, stock density is very different. It has nothing to do with head per acre or acres per head. Rather, it has to do with the total pounds of impact per acre that is influencing the biology, the organic matter, the carbon, and the performance of that soil and of the forages growing in that soil. So stock density is really what we're looking at. I want to understand how many total pounds of animals I'm feeding every day versus how many total head, because the head can be of varying weights. But I really need to know how many total pounds I'm trying to feed every day. And then I need to understand, do I need to be giving them 3% dry matter on a daily basis, in terms of their body weight, 3.5%, 2.5%, whatever. And then I can quickly calculate how big I need to build a pasture or a paddock to put them in for that day. Or I can use herding to do the same thing. So I can either physically build temporary fences using single strand polywire, or we can use herding. We do this on a lot of our western landscapes, and we can use herding in lieu of fencing very, very effectively to accomplish the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a break here, Alan, because when we come back, I want to start then jumping into the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. You keep talking about a phrase called compounding or cascading. And I know as we go through that, you're going to build on that because that's going to make a big point of what we're trying to do here. As we just talked a little bit about the difference between stocking density and stocking rates, a lot of this will start to come together as we work through our program today. When we come back, we're going to get into the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. My guest today is Alan Williams. We're going to take a break, be back on the Work and Ranch Radio Show. But first, this segment brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind. To find out more, you can go to their website at k-linena.com. Back after this.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show as we continue on. Our guest today is Alan Williams, who, as I said at the top of the program, is one of the founding partners of Understanding Ag, as well as the Soil Health Academy, and also featured in those short docu-films or docu-series, Carbon Cowboys. If you haven't had an opportunity to watch those, I encourage you to check those out for yourself. I think you'd find them quite interesting, especially if you're interested in what we're talking about here today. Now, Alan, in the first segment, you gave us kind of a broad overview about what adaptive grazing is, what it means, the flexibility in that, and that it's not just this prescription that we just mix up and we use it year over year. So as we look at that and try to understand what all that means, there's 3 rules of adaptive stewardship that you have. So let's start with number 1, the first one being the principle of compounding.
Yes, absolutely. So the first is the rule of compounding. And again, as I said earlier, it's quite simple. In nature and biology on our farms and ranches, there never are any singular effects. Everything that we do, every decision we make, or even decisions we fail to make, create a whole series of compounding and cascading effects. And those effects are never neutral. They're either positive or negative. So the rule of compounding is really a rule of recognition. It's understanding that that is exactly what's occurring and that our management decisions and practices are going to influence that one way or the other. We're either going to be making positive compounding progress or we're going to be going backwards, one of the two. There no stasis, no sustainability in real life. So the second rule is the rule of diversity, okay? And that means that we need absolutely as much diversity as possible. In nature, wherever nature is able to exert her influence, we never see monocultures, we never see low diversity. We always see abundance and an incredible array of diversity, and that's diversity in the microbial species in the soil, beneficial insects and pollinators, wildlife, birds, plant species, and even in our agronomic and agricultural enterprises. The more diversity, the better. So we want diversity. The third rule is really where the rubber meets the road on all of this and where we make the real changes and the ongoing incremental progress. And it's called the rule of disruption. And I like to use this analogy to help people understand the rule of disruption. So many of our listeners may have been athletes at some point in their life or still are an athlete. And every athlete understands that if you're going to make ongoing progress in your sport and you're going to be highly competitive, you cannot do the same exercise routine at the same duration and intensity day in and day out, year in and year out. If that's what you do and you never change your exercise routine, you're going to quickly hit a wall and stop making progress, and then you're actually going to digress. You can't even maintain the same level of performance. So every athlete understands that to make ongoing progress, they've got to introduce planned, purposeful disruptions into their exercise routine. It's the same out here on our farms and our ranches. We're biology, and everything that we deal with is biology. So all biology responds positively to planned, purposeful disruptions. So what are some of those disruptions? Well, let's think about this, okay? So first of all, it means stop doing things the same way all the time, okay? Stop being prescriptive or formulaic. But some of the planned disruptions that we can implement routinely to help us make ongoing progress are altering stock density, again, pounds per acre. So don't pick a set number of pounds per acre and say, this is where I've got to be at every day. I got to be at 50,000 pounds per acre or 100,000 pounds per acre or whatever. No, we want to intentionally alter stock density. For instance, on our own ranches, we are altering anywhere from about 20,000 pounds per acre to over 1 million pounds per acre, and that's intentional. And there's reasons for each stock density. Another thing that we can do is we can alter our rotational pattern. So every spring, if we start in the same pastures or same rangeland and make the same rotational pattern every year, alter that rotational pattern. It actually makes a pretty darn big difference. The next thing is alter time of season or year that we're grazing in a particular area. Don't always go back and graze the same rangeland or pasture in May or June, for instance. Alter that timing. We can alter paddock shape or configuration if we're building temporary paddocks, and then alter paddock direction. Those are very good. Alter rest period. So we don't want to be coming back around, in the more temperate areas. Too many people are coming back around every 30 to 45 days. In the more arid areas, they may be coming around every 6 months or once a year or whatever, but we need to alter those rest periods intentionally. The other things that we can do is we can do planned burns. That's planned purposeful disruption. We can do bale grazing as a planned purposeful disruption. We can, if we have multiple species, we can alter species order. If you have cattle and sheep or goats or whatever, alter species order. And in the West and in many areas of the country, contour grazing can be very important. And this is grazing them along the contour rather than grazing them up and down slopes. They produce dramatically different results. They're not the same at all in their impact. And when you contour graze, you always want to start them down low. You always want to start them in your bottoms or your meadows and move up slope, never the opposite. Why? Because over the decades and over the centuries, we've had a lot of erosion and all of this, and we always have more diversity, more organic matter, more carbon down low than we do high. And we can use our livestock as a tool to transport that diversity, that biology, that carbon and organic matter impact back up slope through what we call contour grazing. And then finally, we can have combinations of these disruptions in the same grazing event that make them even more powerful. For example, I can alter stock density, I can alter rest period, and I can alter paddock configuration in the same grazing event. So I've combined 3 disruptions into one. So there's literally hundreds and hundreds of iterations here that we can work with just that handful of disruptions that I just listed. Mm-hmm. And the key here, Justin, is don't pick a disruption or just a couple of these and say, okay, that's what I'm going to do from now on. If you do that, it's no longer disruptive, it's prescriptive. You want to weave in many of these disruptions and combinations of these disruptions, year in and year out to be able to make that ongoing progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Alan, I have a question because we talked in the last segment a little bit about density. And one of the things, again, about this whole thing is this is adaptive. So that's not necessarily a set deal. But I know when in where I have listened to you before, you showed a lot of results between 3 different types of grazing patterns. Very conventional, what we saw, many, many years ago, to maybe something where there was a rotation done every 10 to 14 days, and to what we see with more of in an adaptive grazing type of mindset. I want to quickly go back to density and talk about what kind of numbers. Again, it could fluctuate. I understand that. We need to be flexible with that. But what kind of numbers do we need to be looking at when we're talking about density, which is pounds per acre, that's going to make the effect? And we'll talk about the benefits in a bit. But what do we need to be volume-wise do we need to be looking at?
Okay, so let's think about this. And depending on where, each listener is ranching, this is going to vary. So for instance, in more arid and semi-arid regions of the West, you're under more conventional grazing, your average stock density per acre may be only 25 or 50 pounds per acre. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's it. And that's what you've been averaging in terms of effective stock density year over year over year with conventional grazing. In the East, in the more temperate regions, average stock density per acre with conventional grazing tends to be somewhere between 200 and 500 pounds per acre. Okay, so that's it. That's it. So in the West, if I can get 5,000 or 10,000 pounds per acre impact, that's an exponential increase in stock density. In the East, if I can go from 500 pounds to 50,000 pounds per acre, that's an exponential increase. So that makes a profound difference. Why? Because you're concentrating more manure and urine on every acre. You and your livestock are shedding microbes, okay, in their saliva, from their hair coat, and shedding microbes in the manure and urine. So you're concentrating this microbial shedding. And that more concentrated microbial shedding from the livestock actually creates a huge response from the microbes in the soil. And you get rapid replication, reproduction of those microbes, and then nutrient cycling, soil aggregation, all these good things beginning to happen. So stock density triggers this whole compounding, cascading effect of things that are very positive. And stock density, again, is relative depending on where you're located. So, 20,000 pounds per acre is monumental in places in Montana, Utah, Nevada, other places, Arizona, you name it. But in my country, that's sort of low, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's all relative here. So don't get locked into thinking you've got to be at a certain level. It's all about increasing that stock density from wherever it was in your area, your region. It's got to be context specific.
Again, adaptive being one of the key phrases that we keep returning back to in our conversation here today. Alan, let's take another break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I think are probably things that you get pushed back on just a little bit as we look at new things that often are different than conventional ways. So we're going to talk about that when we come up in our next segment. This segment brought to you by Zoetis. Unlocking genetic potential starts with a complete picture of your commercial cow herd. You can learn how to get started with Inherent Select at beefgenetics.com/radio. We'll be back after this.
What if your commercial beef herd could be better than you thought possible? Genetic testing can help give you more confidence about what your herd is made of, and more importantly, what it can be. Inherent Select from Zoetis provides data-driven genetic insights to help you make more informed selection, breeding, and culling decisions about your cows and heifers. The journey from genetic potential to reality begins with Inherent Select. Ask a genetics rep how to save on testing with our whole herd promotion. Go to beefgenetics.com/radio.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest is Alan Williams, one of the founding partners of Understanding Ag, as well as the Soil Health Academy. And Alan, I've enjoyed our conversation here today, but I want to take the next few minutes of this segment to be the rancher that's going to be maybe the Debbie Downer in the conversation with questions that I'm sure that you get at different times. As we had already addressed in our first segment, a lot of times people, when they hear new things or ways of doing things that it's against the conventional mindset of how we used to do it, it's easy to point the finger and say, well, it's not for my operation. It's either I'm too big or I'm too small, or it won't work with the type of enterprises that I run. It's probably for somebody else, not me. But one of those things that would be a little bit concerning for some listening, when we had talked about in the first segment, in order to achieve some of the density numbers that we need to create change, create that cascading effect, is the use of temporary fencing. And I know when we start talking about those kinds of things, in addition to maybe we're moving daily, or in some cases mob grazing, which would be multiple moves in the course of one day. And I'll tell you, that's going to be scary for somebody that's really never done that before.
Yeah, until you understand it. So let me give you an example. It can take, just minutes a day to build new paddocks and to move livestock. The livestock move themselves. Once they're used to this, you're not having to get out there and herd them and move them and those types of things. They're moving themselves from paddock to paddock. Let me give you a perfect example. So the Birdwell and Clark Ranch near Henrietta, Texas, Emory Birdwell and Deborah Clark, they are running anywhere from 5,000 to over 8,000 head of stockers a day, and moving them 4 times a day. Or even at times 6 times a day. And they're building polywire paddocks. It takes 2 people, 30 minutes or less per move, okay, to build the paddock and then move the cattle. 30 minutes or less. Now, think about it. You're a stocker operator, so gain, performance, and health, morbidity, mortality is crucial there, right? Absolutely crucial to their profitability. Well, here's the benefits. So in a very short period of time, they're seeing every animal every day, multiple times a day. If they were on a more conventional grazing, it would take them all day long just to get around and try to see every animal, and they still wouldn't see every animal. But with making day moves every single day, every animal comes by them every single day in just a matter of mere minutes. So they're able to quickly identify anybody that's sick, anybody that's injured, anybody that has a problem, and treat that animal right then and there out in the pasture. So that's just one example. We're doing this in very rugged landscapes, throughout the West, and where you can effectively implement temporary fencing through polywire and shred and post, you do that. But where you can't, we implement it through herding. And this is very effective and very cost effective. It actually makes you money. Let's face it, there's a lot of 20 and 30 something year olds and even teenagers that love to sit astride a horse, and that's what they want to do. Well, we can make them very happy. We can put them out on horseback on an everyday basis. Your job is to move and park these cattle here today, and then to move and park them over there tomorrow. And they make you money. They don't cost you money. That's what we have to understand. And again, they're seeing those animals, every animal, every single day. So you're minimizing issues, minimizing problems. So where we think that this takes more labor, more time, more effort, actually in the end, it takes far, far less. And we're much more effective and efficient at what we're doing. And we have far less morbidity, mortality, and issues with animal performance.
Mm-hmm. You talked a bit about, as you were talking about Birdwell Ranch there in Texas, knowing that it is a yearling outfit and gains are a big part. So animal performance is a huge, huge thing to them. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm a cow-calf guy. And this is one of the things I heard early on was as a cow-calf guy, well, you're going to lose performance in your calves. One of the things that was interesting when I was watching one of your talks was the fact that it's important that we calculate the amount of forage when we're doing our density and we're figuring all of that out, that we put into numbers. Okay, this cow's going to need, she's lactating, she needs 3.5% of her body weight, so that we're making sure we're putting them on pasture that has the ability for them to perform. And so to me, there's an awful lot of this that just requires just putting your numbers together, understanding this, because the one thing that always comes up is performance.
So to that point, our animals actually perform far better being managed this way, not worse. We actually are weaning, and we've got data after data after data on this, and not just on our own ranches, but on many, many, many client ranches, where total pounds weaned per acre has gone up significantly, not gone down. Okay, so if your total pounds weaned is going down, honestly, that's a management problem. That's not the fault of adaptive grazing. You're not giving them enough to eat. First and foremost, with adaptive grazing every single day is exactly as you said, making sure that you're giving them enough to eat every day to meet their nutritional requirements. That's a basic tenet of this. And then once you've done that, you can do a whole lot of other things. So we are not seeing decreased performance at all. We are seeing significantly enhanced performance on these animals.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alan, I wanted to make sure that we left enough time that you could share with our listeners here some of the resources that you have available through different websites. Where do they go to find that?
Absolutely. So, they can start at our website at understandingag.com. We've got podcasts, webinars, articles, case studies, all of those types of things available to them. We even have online courses on adaptive grazing and that type of thing. And then to get some practical hands-on training, they can go to soilhealthacademy.org. And we offer schools routinely throughout the year and all over North America. So they can go to that website and find an upcoming school that is near them. and take advantage of that. And that they are very hands-on, very practical, and multi-day schools that prepare them to do this on their own farms and ranches within their context. We also have a lot of scholarship dollars available. So I encourage anybody that wants to attend an academy to also apply for a scholarship.
You bet. And Alan, I'm glad you came on to do this, and I might have jumped into some of this, but at the end of the day, really what this comes down to is, why do we even look at it? Why would we even do something like this? What's the benefits of this? And I think one of the things it comes down to is simply this: land is expensive. I can't afford to go buy another place, but I could maybe afford to double my production. Isn't that kind of what some of this, in addition to just making sure that we're being good stewards of our land?
It absolutely is. And again, if you go to our case studies and a lot of the data that we have, you'll see that it is quite normal that for our ranchers that have gone down this path, within 4 to 5 to 6 years, they have significantly increased their carrying capacity and their stocking rate. So now on the exact same acres, they are now carrying more total head of livestock, producing more total pounds on an annual basis without having to buy more land, pay more taxes, pay more insurance.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Well, that's a good point to stop on right there. And Alan, we're very appreciative of you joining us here on our program today. And, really, if you've listened at any point in time on our show here at the Working Ranch Radio Show, one of the biggest things that I am a huge proponent of is that we are profitable in our ranching operations. And I think part of that is being good stewards of our soil, being good stewards of our resources that we have available. And I think Alan's conversation with us here today points us in a huge aspect of that direction. And so, Alan, again, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
You bet. And again, my guest today, Alan Williams, founding partner of the Understanding Ag as well as the Soil Health Academy. Both are resources that he mentioned just moments ago, that if you want to expand your knowledge or resources that are available through those two different avenues. Of course, the website is understandingag.com. And if you are interested in attending the Soil Health Academy, you can find more information there by going to soilhealthacademy.org. Again, a big thank you to Alan Williams, our guest today on the Working Ranch Radio Show. We'll stay with us when we come back. John Pearson, Brad Bunderson, both with K-Line Irrigation, will be joining us here on the program. I have some questions about the product that they have, and I think you might find that conversation useful as well. So join us when we return here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. And welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm joined now by John Pearson, who is the General Manager of K-Line Irrigation North America, as well as Brad Bunderson, who is their National Salesman. And guys, thanks for joining us here on the program. I know you had the opportunity to listen in as well to my conversation that I just got off with Alan Williams. A lot of great information there. But I was telling you guys before we went on air that I generally have questions about your product. And for those of you that are listening, I think one of the things you have to understand is I'm always cautious about when I talk about different products here on the program, because I don't want it to sound like an infomercial, but I also know that if I generally have questions from a ranching perspective, I'm guessing some of you probably do as well. And I know in looking through some of the material, there's an acronym that you use. It's called ET. First of all, what is it, and what else is important that we need to understand about that, especially when it comes down to planning and looking at an irrigation system that's going to be practical, economical, and even logical in terms of how it lays out. So what is ET? Explain that to me.
Yeah, what it boils down to is the plant's ability to transpire is directly related to the yield. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to have moisture available in that soil profile to be able to transpire. And that ET is just an acronym for evapotranspiration. And so without the ability to have the moisture there to transpire, we can't produce anything. Mm-hmm. So we want that moisture there in the soil.
So as I had said, When it comes to irrigation and effectively doing that, definitely there's a lot of different mechanisms out there. K-line, John, I know you had mentioned to me off air that this was something that you kind of clued in early, late 1999 or 2000 era when you saw this for the first time. And your wife had grown up irrigating and moving a lot of hand line. And this was something you brought into your operation. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, she grew up irrigating, and we bought some ground that had a water right down in a river bottom, and it was odd shape, and there was hand line down there. And she said, well, I know how to work this stuff. And she went out there, and I looked at that and thought, boy, that looks like hard work. So, and realized that it was going to be difficult for us to find labor to do that. And I wasn't sure if I wanted my wife doing that for eternity. So I looked around and I discovered this K-line product, and I went and looked at it and researched it, and I came back and told her that I think I found the product, and I showed her, and she said, well, I don't understand how that works. And so we put some in, and the whole time she was saying, I don't think it's going to work. It doesn't make sense. And I think she moved it 2 days and came back and said, I'm never moving aluminum pipe again. So we then had to convert the whole ranch to it, and then we leased another piece of property, and we put that in to K-line on some lease ground. And the beauty is I can get the neighbor to come help us, because it just means riding around the four-wheeler. And then I think the first year we blew it out. We prepared it for winter. We get pretty cold here in Eastern Washington. And the next winter we got busy and forgot. And I came back in the spring expecting a lot of split pipes, and there was nothing. And so since then we've never blown the K-line out. Mm-hmm. That was 2003. We started with it, just over 20 years.
Well, I think your story, John, with your wife is probably similar to a lot of us when we hear about something new that we're not quite certain about, is we're wondering and have that question about whether or not it's really going to work. So I think our conversation today will provide some light on some of that. Brad, if we could go to you now, I want you to just explain to me generally what the K-line irrigation product is and how it works.
What it is it's a series of protective pods that protect the sprinkler, and they're attached to some polyethylene tubing. And what you do is you drag it into place, let it sit for 12 or 24 hours, typically 24 hours, and then you move it to another spot the next day, and you just keep moving it from one spot to the other throughout that paddock. And then when you get to the end, you can start over again and go back to the starting position. It's very easy to move and low amount of physicality required to do that.
Okay. What kind of infrastructure beyond just the K-line pods themselves? What sort of infrastructure needs to be in place for this to work?
Typically, you need some kind of distribution line to get from your water source to the paddock that you're wanting this K-line to be in. So most of the time, it's buried PVC that goes from your water source to the paddock. And then in a larger field, you might have several of these K-lines running at the same time. So you just need to have this distribution line, this main line PVC to go to each one of these connection points for the K-line.
Mm-hmm. If I could add something there, depending on your ET rate, depends on your return times for your K-line. And so your acreage. So your distribution point could be servicing as little as 2 acres or as much as 6 or 8 acres, depending on your ET rates.
So a question I would have, because I'm talking fields, it could be anywhere from 30, 40 acres up to 100 and some acres or 150 acre type fields. What's the scalability of this in terms of the size of paddocks or fields, pastures? I understand we can probably do fairly small size. I understand that. But how big can we get in this?
Total acres, we can get quite big. I think our largest install here in North America is right around 3,000 acres. One thing, though, when you start talking about increasing production per acre, Justin, is coming back to Alan's point, is you have to increase your stock density. So then you end up with cross fencing. That's where I'm trying to go with this. Yeah. So, a 200 acre irrigated unit here in Eastern Washington probably has about 6 or 8 cross fences in that, whether they're portable or permanent. So then it's just a module, right? You just keep adding 10 acres, 20 acres, whatever. So does that sort of make sense that you don't just irrigate large areas, you end up start having an irrigated operation with laneways and because your production just goes, it increases tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Brad, did you have any other comments on that?
Yeah, and a lot of the time it's driven by how much water your soil will hold. and how frequently you need to irrigate. And a lot of times what we try to do is start off by finding out the moisture holding capacity of your soil, finding out the ET rate, and then that will help us determine how frequently you need to irrigate. And so, if you have a field that will hold 12 days worth of water, then it can do a larger area. If you can only go 6 or 8 days between irrigations, then you need to do a smaller area with that line. And so these zones or these paddocks that each K line is assigned to is really kind of driven by how frequently you need to irrigate. So that adaptability and flexibility that Alan talked about really works well for K line 2 in the fact that you're designing it specific to that soil information and ET rates in your area.
Mm-hmm. I know, as I had mentioned before, the particular area that I'd be looking at is an area that's fairly or not very uniform in terms of shape and size. That is one of the strengths, probably. I'm guessing that's probably one of the reasons I was looking at this, is because looking in these weird fingers that are 10, 12 acre little fingers to bigger pastures, maybe something that has a power line through the middle of it, and you don't want to run you can't put a pivot on it, or you can't put something else because of other issues. That's one of the strengths, I'm guessing, that you're finding as you visit with other producers, is the weirdness of maybe some of their pastures or fields they're dealing with.
Absolutely. When you call us and you look for ideas, designs, quotes, we'll actually get satellite imagery of your property, share that with you. And then you identify any cross fences, and then we design systems that'll fit your layout. I mean, we're basically looking at the same piece of ground from 1,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right too, Justin. You mentioned maybe some obstructions that might be in the field that might be an obstacle for other types of irrigation really aren't an obstacle for K-line, because power lines, trees, a lot of times we'll just work around them and it's not a problem.
Okay. Well, guys, what's the website if folks are interested in looking at more information about K-line irrigation? And I know, John, you talked about in the consultation that you guys have that ability, as we all with Google Earth anymore, we can kind of look at satellite imagery, and I know you have that ability as well. So where do they go to get more information and potentially start this process if they're interested?
So they can go to www.k-linena.com, and on our website there's a button they can click on that's called a request for consultation. They can fill out that form, send us some information about their property, kind of tell us what their goals are, and then we can get back with them with a preliminary information that says, okay, you need to irrigate this frequently, it's going to take about this much water, and we can put together a design based on those specific information that you gave us.
Okay. And to do that is absolutely free?
Yep.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Something that's interesting. It's, as John, you had talked about, 2003 is when you guys put your first one in. It's definitely been around a while. And again, folks, if you would like more information, you can go to their website at k-linena.com. You can find it there. Thanks, guys, for joining us here on the program.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
You bet. And again, that was John Pearson, General Manager of K-Line Irrigation North America, and Brad Bunderson, their National Salesman for K-Line Irrigation. Again, their website, if you'd like more information, you can go there at k-linena.com. We'll stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at our long-term weather, and I'll explain why the Captain Tim O'Byrne is sidelined for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. Back after this.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. If you're a regular listener here to the program, you know about this time of the show is when we would be hearing from the Captain Tim O'Byrne for his weekly edition of Tim's 2 Cents. However, when I texted him, I said, hey, what do you got for this week? He said to tell everybody that he was on assignment. However, here's the truth, folks. He was just getting out of the dentist office chair. And I thought, personally, in my own kind of devious mind, I thought this would be a perfect one for us to have. Definitely a 1 in a million to hear the Captain captain maybe under anesthesia or some influence of anesthesia, or just the numbness in his mouth, like his lips were glued to his gums, to hear what this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents would be like when he comes out of the dentist office chair. But I don't think he was up for that. So anyways, we'll hope to hear from him next week after he's out of the dentist office and has got his teeth floated and ready to go for the summer. Well, we'll turn now and take a look at our long-term weather. And joining us, as he does each and every week, is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we've seen a lot of that severe weather being in the south, southeast, and midwest part of the country, we're now starting to see some of that severe weather moving more towards the west.
Yeah, as we go now into a new month, we're definitely looking at the weather pattern acting like summer finally. I know that a lot of folks who were out and about over the Memorial Day weekend kind of experienced a little bit of everything, really across most of the U.S., whether it was severe weather and more tornadoes in the nation's midsection or snow in the Rockies and up into Yellowstone National Park. Now things are acting a little bit more like summer. And what we're going to see here is it is going to be getting a little bit warmer and drier in the western United States. Not completely dry. There'll still be some showers and thunderstorms. But what I think a lot of folks will notice from the western high plains to the Great Basin is a warmer trend, more of a summer-like pattern, while the middle and the eastern parts of the U.S., well, it's going to cool off. In fact, there's going to be a large part of the nation from the Corn Belt through the Great Lakes that will see temperatures for several days going well below average. It's going to be a bit cool. So that's a reversal of what we had in May. What that reversal is going to do, you had mentioned that some of the more severe weather has gone a little bit more westward. Mm-hmm. That's going to be happening, and we're hoping this reversal in the pattern is going to help, let's say, it won't eliminate severe weather in the Midwest and the nation's south central areas that have had so much tornado activity. I mean, if we're tracking the amount of tornadoes we've had this year, we're very close to the higher end of the averages in terms of how busy it's been with severe weather. But this change in the pattern is going to start to mitigate that a little bit, and we'll start to see less in the way of the tornado and severe weather activity. I'm not saying zero, but less of it.
Yeah. When you're looking out into, 10 to 15 days, is there something specifically you're watching from a weather pattern standpoint that is giving you indication of what this is going to look like as we look into the middle of June?
Well, first of all, we can't go into that long-term forecast without mentioning what's going out in the Pacific.
Sure.
And the La Nina is really coming on. It has really strengthened over the last several weeks. And one thing that we're seeing, we had talked about how June is looking warmer in the West. Mm-hmm. That is certainly something we tend to see. So what we're going to see in June going into July, relative to the 30-year averages, it's going to likely be warmest in the western high plains, the Rockies, and the southwestern areas of the U.S. So we're going to see some heat building in the West. Temperatures, as I mentioned, in the central and east aren't going to be as warm. So I guess for the month of June, to see where it really is going to be hot, it's going to be in those southwest areas of the U.S., parts of the central high plains, central and southern Rockies, back into the Great Basin. Now, some of that heat we're hoping will start to drive some moisture out of Mexico north into places like Arizona and New Mexico towards the middle of the month. I do see, especially after the 10th of June, some of those southwestern areas of the U.S. getting back into the thunderstorm pattern. But the summer is really going to get going first in the West in the month of June, maybe shifting a little bit more to the east as we go to July.
You bet. All right, Don, well, appreciate the update and appreciate you joining us here this week.
Thank you.
You bet. And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with our weekly look at our long-term weather. You can find him on your own as well if you're interested by going to his website at dayweather.com. And there's a link there to his YouTube channel where he sends out his daily video podcast each and every morning. By the way, if you're looking at weather instruments, rain gauges, things like that, especially as we head into the spring and the summer time of the year, and you want to keep track of those kinds of things, check out his website for some of those products that he has listed there. Stay with us. We'll put a wrap on this week's show after this. Well, thanks for joining us here today. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to listen back through this show, you can go to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com or any podcast provider. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.